everyone. Welcome back to the Not Just a Pony Ride podcast. This week's episode is a recycled episode that Katie did on Understanding Diagnosis, What is Stimming? This is the perfect week to share this podcast as we have been resharing our mini course, Unbridled Potential, Support for Neurodivergent Participants in EAS. I will have the link to enroll in this mini course down below in the show notes. I hope you enjoy this episode.
And today we are adding tools to our instructor toolbox with another installation of Understanding Diagnoses. Today's going to be a little bit different though. We aren't going to talk about a specific diagnosis, but rather something that we see as part of the neurodivergent sort of group of diagnoses, and that is stimming. Stimming is shorthand for self-stimulating. It's really a natural and instinctive behavior that anybody can engage in to regulate their sensory experience. You might be thinking like hand flapping, rocking, repetitive vocalizations, things that people say like it's a stim, right? So that's what we're talking about today. And I guess my goal with this episode is that I'm hoping to normalize stimming and help people really understand exactly what it is and when it should or shouldn't be addressed, specifically as it pertains to us in the arena with mounted sessions. Thinking about stimming, we often most associate that with, like I said, the neurodivergent experience, like diagnoses like autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, Tourette's, those types of diagnoses, but it's also common to see almost anyone stimming, not just those with a diagnosis. So if you jiggle your foot or bite your fingernails, pacing while you're thinking, those are all things that we sometimes do when we're bored or to stay awake in a meeting or when we're concentrating or stressed out, right? So all they are is just kind of a coping mechanism, if you will, that helps us regulate our body to do one thing or another. Stimming serves a variety of purposes. It can be honestly anything, but most commonly to reduce anxiety or expending some extra energy, or kind of meeting a sensory need, or it can help us promote focus and concentration. Basically, when our body senses a need, it's going to produce a behavior to help our body adjust and maintain a regulated place. Stimming really truly is sort of a coping skill. It's something that, if we're thinking about our participants, it's something that participant needs in order to help their body feel comfortable or to help their brain relax or focus. It's not something super negative. That said, if the stimming behavior starts to be disruptive to that person's quality of life, like it's posing a safety risk or they can't participate in the things that they need to do every day to be successful, then it should be addressed in a way that still allows that participant to get their needs met, right? But in a more appropriate way. So today I'm going to break down just a couple of examples of forms of stimming that I sometimes see while mounted in the arena and just provide some input on what might be helpful for those behaviors and what we can do to address them. Okay, before we jump into that though, I want to touch really briefly on the function of behavior. So every single behavior we do has a function. When I'm hungry, I get up and walk to the refrigerator, and me walking to the refrigerator is a behavior, okay? So all I'm trying to do is communicate that I'm hungry, and that's why I do that. So the function of a stim could be a variety of things. We talked about that, right? Reducing anxiety, sensory need, something like that. So when we first look at, honestly, any type of behavior, including stims, I don't want us to move with the thought process of, what do I do about this behavior? I want us to first kind of move with, what is my participant trying to communicate to me? And that is going to shift us more towards a preventative, person first, person specific solution that's going to be more effective and less of a sort of quick fix Band-Aid, throw something at the wall, see if it sticks sort of solution. So let's just look at a couple. How about vigorous hand flapping? If your participant gets mounted and they can't stop flapping their hands, or it's excessive to the point that they can't hold onto their reins to even begin the lesson, if that's what you're going to work on. A couple of things we're going to think about first. Is this style of hand flapping probably okay in the car? Sure. Is it probably okay on the playground at school? Probably. But while mounted on a horse, it might depend, right? So if you are using reins, like reining is the primary skill that you are going to work on today, then it might be difficult, right? What that stim is preventing us from being successful in this environment. We surely don't want our reins flapping around, right? We have to put our horse first and think about what that might mean for our horses. You also want to think about what might this be doing to your participant's seat. Now you're thinking it's hand flapping. What does that have to do with their seat? But this also applies to participants who are like rocking in the saddle, rocking and twisting, like twisting their torso and upper body. That's also another common stim that I see sometimes. And all of these movements are incredibly difficult on our horses' backs. If you flap your hands right now, if you're driving, please don't do that. But if you're just listening, flap your hands up and down, and you're going to feel your body has quite a bit of weight shift up and down. That goes all the way through our torso and into our seat. You're almost bouncing. And it's the same with the twisting or rocking. So there's a lot of pressure being displaced onto our horse's back in a very unusual way. And that's going to be stressful. So if we decide that this is probably a stim that we should take a closer look at because of, either it's impacting our ability to do the skill we need to do today, or it's difficult for our horse, right? We are going to look at something that is more appropriate. So we're going to think to ourselves, what is my participant trying to communicate with this hand flapping? And if you're thinking to yourself, where the heck do you even start with that? Ask the family. Hey, mom and dad, I noticed that our participant's name will be Beth. So, hey, mom and dad, I noticed that Beth is really stimming a lot with her hands today. Is that typical? What does that usually mean at home, right? Is she excited? Is she overwhelmed? Is she anxious? Maybe she didn't sleep very well, and that's what she usually does to keep herself awake or focused, right? The family's going to know if it's something that happens at home. Typically, they'll know what the sort of, trigger or what the communication is behind that behavior. This is a great place to start. The next place you're going to look at is like some of the context clues that you're also getting, right? If they're able to communicate with you, you might ask some questions like, hey, it looks like your body needs something today. How are you feeling? Or do you want to go for a trot? Or something like that to kind of help them communicate with you to help those needs be met in a different way. That's maybe a little bit more appropriate. There might be other context clues if they are pre-verbal, right? And aren't quite communicating with you verbally on that level. Are they, rubbing their eyes? Is she tired in that way? Does she seem, lower energy? Is she also doing other things that might indicate that she's overwhelmed, maybe plugging her ears, or she can't follow directions, those types of things? Look for your context clues. So we'll kind of talk through a couple of scenarios. I think that might be helpful. If we find that the answer is that they're overwhelmed or anxious, what about? Is it something that we can help with? Does the hand flapping happen immediately after you ask your participant to do a specific thing? Or maybe you had a horse change today, or maybe you added another participant to the class. Kind of look at your context clues around you in that way too. If those things are true, maybe you're going to work together to find a solution. Identify some other things that we might be able to do as coping or to remove those triggers so that we can be more successful. That is going to help with prevention, right? But the bottom line is that we really need to identify something that is more appropriate where that participant can still can still satisfy that need that her body is telling her, right? Because her body is doing a good job letting her brain know that, hey, I need something different. Something's got to change here. I need this or that. So we still need to satisfy that communication happening in her body. If we're talking about hand flapping, could we maybe use a fidget? Does the family use something at school or at home that she likes? We use a lot of like those koosh balls, like those kind of rubbery feeling things, or fidget spinners, something like that. As long as your horses are desensitized to it, let's go ahead and try to implement some of those strategies. What about reining? So can we switch to a one-hand neck rein? Maybe give them that fidget in the other hand to wiggle or flap so they're not flapping and wiggling their reins. Can they still attend in that way? What if it's a sensory need? Maybe she has a lot of increased energy today. Maybe we just need to get some more movement in, and that's what she's trying to do with her hand flapping. So could we have her hop on a small trampoline before she mounts that day? Or should we start the session with a trot or do some working walks or weaving cones or going over poles? Something to get some more movement at regular intervals during the session to add more movement and increase the sensory experience so that she doesn't have to do it herself with the hand flapping, right? Maybe it's that she's stressed out or anxious. You could even go as far as to teach some more appropriate coping skills if we have that level of communication and things. Taking deep breaths or giving themselves a big bear hug, things like that. If you have the time and space within your lesson to do those things, that would be good too. Are you looking for a leg up in communicating more effectively with participants in your therapeutic writing and EAL lessons? Teaching Aids for EAS comes to the rescue with a range of more than 70 visual aids designed specifically for our industry. Each one has been designed by a PATH International certified professional who understands the unique challenges that we face inside and outside the arena. Visit teachingaidsforeas.com today to shop their range of fun, scalable, and affordable products, including flashcards, posters, activity boards, PEX cards, handheld cueing paddles, arena games, and more. They also work directly with instructors and centers to design custom products and solutions. As a special treat for my Not Just a Pony Ride listeners, use code HETRA, HETRA, for 10% off your order now through May 10th at teachingaidsforeas.com. You know, spoiler alert, I guess, the process that I just went through pertains to really 99% of stimming behaviors. So let's talk about a different one. How about vocal stimming? So that's something that I think a lot of instructors struggle with, especially like screeching or humming, screaming, scripting, things like that, where they're using their voice to satisfy some kind of need. Again, if this is in their bedroom at home and they're by themselves, probably not a big deal. But if they're screeching very loudly and your horse seems stressed by that, not a safe situation. Vocal stimming can be really tricky, especially when we're trying to give directions to participants. Ultimately, as instructors, that's what we're here to do, provide instructions and help our participants to learn, right? So it's difficult to hear what your instructor's saying to follow directions when you're vocally stimming and hearing that within your own head. And it's also difficult to have a reciprocal conversation with your instructor when you're busy using your voice for something else. So what might our participant be trying to communicate? Again, we're going to take notes of any triggers, look at our context clues, and see what else is happening when that vocal stim is increasing. Ask the family, when do you notice that vocalizations increase or persist? Or when does this behavior happen? Number one, what is the cause? But also, two, what do you do about it, right? So do they have a strategy that they use? Let's use it, right? I would go out on a limb to say most of the time with vocal stimming, it's a sensory function. They're trying to either reduce noise that they're getting or increase the noise that they're getting. It can also be due to anxiety or plain old boredom or just trying to communicate something. If I'm someone who's pre-verbal and I don't have the words right now to tell you how I'm feeling, I might be doing some scripting or something like that to try and elicit some type of communication or social exchange, right? So it might be because of that as well. But let's take, for example, if it's, a sensory function, maybe they're feeling overwhelmed with noise. If the arena is too busy or too noisy, can we decrease the stimulation? Oftentimes, if you just do that, like, for example, you have a chatty sidewalker. We love our sidewalkers and our volunteers, right? They're super helpful. But sometimes asking our participant, everything they did at school that day is overwhelming to them. or decreasing your demands as the instructor. If we're giving very long, drawn out instructions to our participants, increasing that auditory stimulation, we might just be overwhelming them. And so if we can reduce some of those for a little bit, it can help a lot. Maybe if they're trying to communicate something I do a lot is I say, I hear your voice, whether that's humming or screeching or scripting, anything like that. So I hear your voice. Do you have something you want to ask me, or do you have something you want to tell me? If they use a device or they use pictures to communicate, maybe that's the time that you would help them to use those things or those tools. Sometimes something as simple as that, giving them that little bit of attention, can help if that's the case. Another thing we can do with all types of self-stimulating behavior is just use a lot of positive reinforcement when they're choosing to do something more appropriate or something different, right? So I guess for vocal stim, if they're choosing to do anything different with their voice, that isn't particularly successful, maybe it's even like if they tend to screech very loudly, maybe they're humming or they're doing it quieter than usual, or they're using other appropriate communication strategies like their pictures or asking for help or something like that. Use a lot of positive reinforcement to help those participants understand that, yes, that's what we want to do instead of that other behavior. The other thing to keep in mind is that stimming can really ebb and flow. So your participant may have varying levels of how much or how often that they are stimming, and you may need to use strategies more often or at the beginning more and then taper off. The thing to keep in mind is just that everybody's body is different in what they need, and depending on what we experience during the day, it can change. When our participants come to us for their session, we are a very small part of their day. So they've experienced a lot either before or after, and so those needs can change. Additionally, stimming this is just a good thing to keep in mind, and that I always try to drive home in all of our instructors and therapists as well here at HETRA, is that stimming that is harmful to your horse or impacts the overall safety of your lesson could be a consideration to move to alternative programming, or maybe a shortened lesson time or a different lesson, right? Maybe an independent lesson, something like that, until an appropriate strategy can be put into place. This is where we love our equicizer. We can put our participants in all the typical situations that they are when they're mounted, but remove that live horse factor. So at the end of the day, we're still our horse's primary advocates. And so we have to watch closely to how our horses are responding to stimming behavior, little things, watch their ears, watch their eyes, are they flicking their tail, things like that, and use that as data to make these decisions. Even if you aren't seeing unsafe behavior like spooks or, things like that, it could be over time taking toll on our horse's mental health and well-being, where these things will tick away until it may become unsafe, right? And that is not something that we want. So we always have to advocate for our horse's mental health and well-being and the safety of our lessons. That said, we also just need to create a safe space for our participants to express themselves. Stimming is a way that, yes, our body meet our body's needs, but it's also a form of self-expression. So learning about it is the very first step. Kudos to you for listening to this podcast, because that's what you're doing, right? You're educating yourself on what stimming is and how you can be helpful. The other thing we can do is just provide very supportive communication around it, validate our participants' feelings, let them know that it's okay to engage in activities that are safe and appropriate and help their body feel good, and help them understand when it's not, right? So always bring it back to our horses. That's why our participants are in our sessions. That's what they're here to do. And so if we can bring that back to our horses in the way that it makes our horses feel, that's going to be very helpful to connect those dots. The other thing I would say is always communicate with your family about stimming and use them as your greatest resource to identify either a good alternative or a plan, or, the prevention strategies that we talk about for when stimming happens. We just don't want to make assumptions or judgments based on anyone's stimming behaviors and just focus on promoting understanding and respect and helping our participants get the needs that their bodies and brains ultimately want, right?
That's all for today. Don't forget to check the show notes below to get plugged in with us on our socials. This podcast is brought to you by Hetra University, the educational arm of the Heartland Equine Therapeutic Riding Academy in Gretna, Nebraska. Our mission is to deliver high-quality educational resources to the EAS community. To explore everything we have to offer, visit us at www.hetrauniversity.org. Thanks for hanging out with us. Until next time, keep changing lives one stride at a time.